In preparing this application, South Africa has paid close attention to the provisions of the Genocide Convention, to its interpretation, and to its application in the years following its entry into force on January 12, 1951.
South Africa is highly cognizant of the fact that acts of genocide are distinct from other violations of international law sanctioned or perpetrated by the Israeli government and military in Gaza, including intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population, civilian objects, and buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, historic monuments, hospitals, and places where the sick and wounded are collected.
Torture. The starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, and other war crimes and crimes against humanity, though there is often a close connection between all such acts.
It is important to place the acts of genocide in the broader context of Israel's conduct towards Palestinians during its 75-year-long apartheid, its 56-year-long belligerent occupation of Palestinian territory, and its 16-year-long blockade of Gaza, including the serious and ongoing violations of international law associated therewith, including grave breaches of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
South Africa is acutely aware of the particular weight of responsibility in initiating proceedings against Israel for violations of the Genocide Convention. However, South Africa is also acutely aware of its own obligation as a state party to the Genocide Convention to prevent genocide.
Israel's acts and omissions in relation to Palestinians violate the Genocide Convention. That is the shared view of numerous other state parties to the convention, including the state of Palestine itself, which has called on world leaders to take responsibility to stop the genocide against our people.
United Nations experts have also repeatedly sounded the alarm for over 10 weeks that, quote, considering statements made by Israeli political leaders and their allies, accompanied by military action in Gaza and escalation of arrests and killings in the West Bank, there is a risk of genocide against the Palestinian people.
United Nations experts have also expressed their profound concern about the failure of the international system to mobilize to prevent genocide against Palestinians, and have called on the international community to do everything it can to immediately end the risk of genocide against Palestinian people. The Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, acting under its early warning and urgent action procedure, has also called on all state parties to the Genocide Convention to fully respect their obligation to prevent genocide.
This section provides an overview of the acts in which Israel has engaged that are genocidal in character, having regard to their nature, scope, and context.
These acts are ongoing in a conflict context, where Israel is deliberately imposing telecommunications blackouts on Gaza and restricting access by fact-finding bodies and the international media.
In the 2 months since the 7th of October 2023, the number of journalists killed already exceeded that of the entirety of World War II.
Further detail will be provided regarding these acts over the course of these proceedings. However, such information as is available establish that Israel
1. Is engaged in killing Palestinians in Gaza, including Palestinian children, in large numbers.
2. Is causing serious bodily and mental harm to Palestinians in Gaza, including Palestinian children, and is inflicting on them conditions of life intended to bring about their destruction as a group.
These conditions include 3. Expulsions from homes and mass displacement alongside the large-scale destruction of homes and residential areas.
4. Deprivation of access to adequate food and water.
5. Deprivation of access to adequate shelter, clothes, hygiene, and sanitation.
6. Deprivation of access to adequate medical care.
7. The destruction of the life of the Palestinian people in Gaza.
And 8. Imposing measures intended to prevent Palestinian birth.
United Nations chiefs and the International Committee of the Red Cross, no strangers to conflict situations, have called what is unfolding in Gaza a crisis of humanity.
According to the United Nations Secretary General, humanitarian veterans who've served in war zones and disasters around the world, people who've seen everything, say that they've seen nothing like what they see today in Gaza.
An entire population is besieged and under attack, denied access to essentials for survival, bombed in their homes, shelters, hospitals, and places of worship.
The UNRWA Commissioner General said it is a living hell. It is a war of all the superlatives. Everything is unprecedented, and we are out of words to describe what is going on.
Over 21,110 Palestinians are reported to have been killed since Israel began its military assault on Gaza. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, at least 70% of whom are believed to be women and children. An additional estimated 7,780 people, including at least 4,700 women and children, are reported missing, presumed dead under the rubble of destroyed buildings, dying slow deaths or decomposing in the streets where they were killed.
Nowhere is safe in Gaza, as the United Nations Secretary General and many other United Nations experts have now made clear to the international community. Palestinians in Gaza have been killed in their homes, in places where they sought shelter, in hospitals, in UNRWA schools, in churches, in mosques, and as they tried to find food and water for their families.
They've been killed if they failed to evacuate, in the places to which they fled, and even as they attempted to flee along Israeli-declared safe routes. Reports are multiplying of Israeli soldiers performing summary executions, including of multiple members of the same family, men, women, and older people. One such account is the reported execution in Gaza City of at least 11 male members of the Anad family and their relatives, boys and men, said to have been separated out by Israeli soldiers and shot in front of their family.
There are also reports of unarmed people, including Israeli hostages, being shot dead on sight, despite posing no threat, including while waving white flags. Attacks on Palestinian homes and residential blocks account for a significant number of the dead, with Israel reportedly using artificial intelligence to generate up to 100 bombing targets per day.
Israel is said to be dropping dumb bombs on Gaza, as well as heavy bombs weighing up to 900 kilograms, which have a predicted lethal radius of up to 360 meters and are expected to cause severe injury and damage as far as 800 meters from the point of impact. This weaponry is being deployed in one of the most densely populated areas in the world, where approximately 1 in every 100 people has now been killed.
For Palestinian children in particular, quote, "Death is everywhere and nowhere is safe." A total of over 7,729 Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza to date. Over 115 Palestinian children in Gaza are killed every day. It is estimated that more Palestinian children were killed in the first 3 weeks in Gaza alone, a total of 3,195, than the total number of children killed each year across the world's conflict zones since 2019. The scale of Palestinian child killings in Gaza is such that United Nations chiefs have described it as, quote, "a graveyard for children."
An estimated 1,779 Palestinian families in Gaza have lost multiple family members, and hundreds of multi-generational families have been killed in their entirety, with no remaining survivors.
Doctors, journalists, teachers, academics, and other professionals are also being killed at wholly unprecedented rates. To date, Israel has killed over 311 doctors, nurses, and other health workers, including doctors and ambulance drivers killed on duty. 103 journalists, amounting to over 1 per day. 40 civil defense workers, responsible for helping to dig victims out of the rubble, killed while on duty. And over 209 teachers and educational staff. 144 United Nations employees have been killed, the highest number of aid workers killed in UN history in such a short time. It is estimated that it will take years to recover the remains of people from beneath the rubble, and that the costly technical process will not result in the identification of each body.
It was already known that repeated exposure to conflict and violence, including witnessing and experiencing housing demolition, combined with Israel's siege of Gaza since 2007, is associated with high levels of psychological distress amongst Palestinians. Indeed, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2712 expressed its deep concern that the disruption of access to education has a dramatic impact on children, and that conflict has a lifelong effect on their physical and mental health. This disruption and its dramatic impact on children must be considered in particular and in the context of the number of Palestinian students and educators who have been killed, 4,037 and 209 respectively, and wounded estimated at 7,259. And the number of Palestinian schools having been damaged or destroyed, 352, or 74% of the schools in the whole of Gaza. Medical professionals assess that the health effects on all Palestinian children, women, men, older people, people with disabilities, and people marginalized identities are immense. An emergency coordinator for Médecins Sans Frontières, interviewed on her return from 5 weeks in Gaza, described, "It's even worse in reality than it looks. The amount of suffering is just something incomparable. It's really unbearable. I'm speechless when I try and think of the future of these children. Generations of children who will be handicapped, who will be traumatized. The very children in our mental health program are telling us that they would rather die than continue living in Gaza now."
The extreme levels of bombardment and lack of any safe areas are also causing severe mental trauma in the Palestinian population in Gaza. Even before the latest onslaught, Palestinians in Gaza suffered severe trauma from prior attacks. 80% of Palestinian children experienced higher levels of emotional distress, demonstrating bedwetting, 79%, and reactive mutism, 59%, and engaging in self-harm, 59%, and suicidal thoughts, 55%. 11 weeks of relentless bombardment, displacement, and loss will necessarily have led to a further increase in those figures, particularly for the estimated tens of thousands of Palestinian children who have lost at least one parent, and those who are the sole surviving members of their families. For the families who remain intact or partially intact, quote, "It's about doing everything you can so your child doesn't realise that you've lost control."
There are reports of Israeli forces using white phosphorus in densely populated areas in Gaza. As the World Health Organization describes, even small amounts of white phosphorus can cause deep and severe burns, penetrating even through bone and capable of reigniting after initial treatment. There are no functioning hospitals in the north of Gaza in particular, such that injured persons are reduced to waiting to die, unable to seek surgery or medical treatment beyond first aid, dying slow, agonizing deaths from their injuries or from resultant infections.
Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, have reportedly been arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress and remain outside in cold weather, before being forced onto trucks and taken to unknown locations. Medics and first responders in particular have been repeatedly detained by Israeli forces, with many being detained incommunicado at unknown locations. Videos published by Israeli media on Christmas Day appeared to show hundreds of Palestinians rounded up inside Al Yarmouk football stadium in Gaza City, including children, older people, and persons with disabilities, being forced to strip to their underwear in degrading conditions. United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or UNRWA, reports video footage showing bruises and burns on the bodies of detainees. Images of mutilated and burned corpses, alongside videos of armed attacks by Israeli soldiers, are reportedly circulated in Israel via a Telegram channel called 72 Virgins Uncensored, billed as exclusive content from the Gaza Strip.
Israel is repeatedly issuing evacuation orders demanding that Palestinian civilians in certain areas of Gaza leave their homes for other areas. The first such order, issued on the 13th of October 2023, demanded that 1.1 million Palestinians living or otherwise present in the north of Gaza, including Gaza City, move to the south of Gaza within a 24-hour window. The International Committee of the Red Cross warned that the evacuation directive, impacting approximately 36% of Gaza's territory, combined with the complete siege of Gaza, was not compatible with international humanitarian law. The World Health Organization warned that it could be tantamount to a death sentence for hospital patients. The evacuation was, however, maintained and has been reissued on a number of occasions, including on the 28th of October 2023, ahead of the Israeli announcement of ground operations in northern Gaza, and again thereafter. Israel has also issued more specific evacuation notices, ordering people in certain parts of Gaza City to evacuate to other parts. Many of those who are unwilling or unable to evacuate are then bombed in their homes.
It is estimated that over 1.9 million Palestinians, out of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people, approximately 85% of the population, have been forced to flee their homes.
Palestinians fleeing the north pursuant to Israel's evacuation orders were urged to move south along Gaza's main traffic artery, Salah ad-Din Road, on certain days during certain designated hours.
However, there were numerous reported instances of shelling along the routes and of other violence by Israeli forces against evacuating Palestinian civilians, including inhuman and degrading treatment, arbitrary arrests, unlawful detention, and killings. Israel has also continued bombing south of Wadi Gaza throughout this time, killing many Palestinians who evacuated, initially prompting many Palestinian families to seek to return north to at least risk being bombed in the civilian surrounding of their homes.
On Christmas Eve itself, the Israeli army bombed Al-Maghazi refugee camp in the middle area, an area to which tens of thousands of Palestinians had fled from the north, killing an estimated 86 people, including many women and children, and injuring many others.
For many Palestinians, the forced evacuation from their homes is necessarily permanent. Israel has now damaged or destroyed an estimated 355,000 Palestinian homes, amounting to 60% of the entire housing stock in Gaza. The extent of the destruction in the north of Gaza in particular has rendered it largely unlivable, with the destruction in the south reaching a similar level. As noted by the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of internally displaced persons, Gaza's housing and civilian infrastructure have been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of massed forced displacement of Palestinians by Israel. The forced displacements in Gaza are genocidal, in that they are taking place in circumstances calculated to bring about the physical destruction of Palestinians in Gaza.
Experts are now predicting that more Palestinians in Gaza may die from starvation and disease than airstrikes. And yet Israel is intensifying its bombing campaign, precluding the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians. It is clear that Israel is, through its actions and policies in Gaza, deliberately inflicting on Palestinians conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction.
On the 9th of October 2023, Israel declared a, quote, complete siege on Gaza, allowing no electricity, no food, no water, and no fuel to enter the Strip. Although the siege has been partially alleviated since then, with some aid trucks being permitted in since the 21st of October 2023, this remains wholly insufficient and well below the pre-October 2023 average of approximately 500 trucks per day.
Moreover, fuel imports permitted since 21 November 2023 are well below the minimum requirements for essential humanitarian operations, meaning that such limited humanitarian aid as is being allowed in cannot easily be moved around Gaza away from entry points.
As the Secretary General has starkly assessed, the level of destruction in Gaza is now so catastrophic that, quote, the conditions for the effective delivery of humanitarian aid no longer exist, but even if sufficient supplies were permitted into Gaza, intense bombardment and hostilities, Israeli restrictions on movement, fuel shortages, and interrupted communications make it impossible for UN agencies and their partners to reach most of the people in need.
Israel has now pushed the Palestinian population in Gaza to the brink of famine, with international agencies warning that the risk of famine is real, World Food Programme, and that it is increasing each day. Most of the Palestinian people in Gaza are now starving, with levels of starvation rising daily. The World Health Organization warns that hunger is ravaging Gaza.
As the United Nations Secretary General has stated, 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people anywhere in the world are in Gaza. With Palestinians in Gaza facing the highest levels of acute food insecurity ever classified by the IPC. UNRWA's Commissioner General describes, quote, desperate, hungry, and terrified people who are now stopping aid trucks, taking the food, and eating it right away, close quotes. The World Health Organization has stated that, quote, an unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger, with insufficient food and high levels of malnutrition.
The conditions created by the siege are exacerbated by Israel's continuing strikes on Gaza, including on its bakeries, water facilities, and last remaining operating mill, and its razing of agricultural lands, crops, orchards, and greenhouses. By 16th of November 2023, the food infrastructure in Gaza was already considered no longer functional, given shop and market closures, the lack of essential food items, and the inflated price of the scarce food available. Bread is scarce or non-existent, with food scarcity leading to significant price hikes, and the price of flour increasing by 65% at one stage. Livestock, that has not been killed is facing starvation, and crops are damaged or destroyed. Many Palestinians are resorting to foraging due to hunger.
Water is also severely depleted. Israel continues to cut off piped water for the north of Gaza, and the North's water desalination plant is non-functioning. From 15th of October 2023, Israel began piping a small amount of water to the south, in part to push the civilian population to the southern strip. The damage from Israeli airstrikes and shelling has also rendered most of the water systems inoperable. The World Food Programme has reported that there's only 1.5 to 1.8 litres of clean water available per person per day, and that's for all uses: drinking water, washing, food preparation, sanitation and hygiene. This is far below the emergency threshold of 1.5 litres per day for war or famine-like conditions, or the survival threshold of 3 litres per day. The World Health Organization Emergency Medical Team's coordinator described the scene at Al-Haib Arab Hospital, where medical staff were struggling to cope with no food, no fuel, no water, stating, "It looks more like a hospice now than a hospital. It's pretty unbearable to see somebody with casts on multiple limbs, external fixator on multiple limbs, without drinking water and almost no IV fluids available." He said that patients were crying out in pain, but they were also crying out for us to give them water. He urged that the time is now. We are dealing with starving people now, adults, children. It's unbearable.
The lack of water is severely impacting lactating women in particular, who, even if undertaking only a moderate amount of exercise, require a supply of 7.5 liters of water a day for drinking, sanitation, and hygiene to keep themselves and their babies healthy. Young mothers, unable to breastfeed for lack of proper nutrition arising from the food scarcity, have been forced to use contaminated water to prepare formula where it is available, risking disease in vulnerable babies. In parallel, the chronic unavailability of formula is also risking the lives of newborn babies, dying from avoidable causes due to the absence of medical care, food, water, and adequate sanitation. The impacts of malnourishment on older children may also be particularly grave and long-lasting, preventing them from reaching their full potential in terms of physical growth, cognitive capacity, school performance, and productivity later in life. Many healthcare workers also lack sufficient food and water to continue working, which will also necessarily further impact on health and mortality rates.
This is all happening to a population that was already extremely vulnerable as a result of Israel's prior actions against Gaza. Israel has long hindered the creation and repair of water installation and desalination plants in Gaza, such that 95% of water from Gaza's sole aquifer was already unsuitable for consumption prior to 7th of October 2023. Through its 16-year blockade, Israel also severely impacted the water supply. Its repeated attacks on Gaza and its restrictions on repairing the degraded wastewater infrastructure damaged the soil, rendering agriculture challenging. Israel also restricted access by Palestinians in Gaza to up to 35% of agricultural land and up to 85% of Gaza's fishing waters. Consequently, over 68% of households, around 1.3 million people, were severely or moderately food insecure prior to the 7th of October 2023. With 58% of the population dependent on humanitarian aid, 7,685 children under 5 years of age in Gaza were suffering from life-threatening wasting, the deadliest form of child malnutrition. The impact on Palestinian children of Israel's forced starvation of Gaza will necessarily be serious and long-lasting.
Recent reports of Israeli plans to flood tunnels in Gaza with seawater is of extreme concern, given the risks it would pose of further degradation and collapse of Gaza's water and sewage infrastructure, and of long-lasting contamination of Gaza's aquifer and soil. Environmental experts have warned that the strategy risks causing an ecological catastrophe that would leave Gaza with no drinkable water, devastate what little agriculture is possible, and ruin the conditions of life of everyone in Gaza. The United Nations Special Rapporteur for the Right to Water is reported to have compared the plan to the mythical Roman salting of the fields of Carthage to prevent crop growth and render the territory uninhabitable.
Today, as a result of Israel's military operation, nearly 1.2 million civilians are sheltering in UNRWA premises. The agency has become the primary platform for humanitarian assistance to over 2.2 million people in Gaza, a platform on the verge of collapse.
The majority of the 1.9 million displaced Palestinians in Gaza are seeking shelter in UNRWA facilities, which primarily consist of schools and tents. These locations themselves are not safe. To date, and despite Israel having been provided with the coordinates of all UN nations facilities, Israel has killed hundreds of Palestinian men, women, and children seeking shelter in UNRWA facilities and injured over 1,000.
UNRWA is, as of today, still operational in Gaza, though just barely. Our staff are still operating health centres, managing shelters, and supporting traumatized people, some arriving carrying their dead children. We are still distributing food, even though the corridors and courtyards of our premises are too crowded to walk through. Our staff take their children to work so they know they are safe or that they can die together. More than 130 UNRWA staff are confirmed killed in bombardments, most with their families. The number might rise by the time you read this. At least 70% of UNRWA staff are displaced and lack food, water, and adequate shelter. We're hanging on by our fingertips. If UNRWA collapses, humanitarian assistance in Gaza will also collapse. In my 35 years working in complex emergencies, I have never written such a letter, predicting the killing of my staff and the collapse of the mandate I am expected to fill.
Throughout Gaza, there are acute shortages in warm clothes, bedding, blankets, and critical non-food items, with people heavily dependent on salvage wood and waste for cooking and warmth, raising the risk of respiratory diseases. There is also an acute shortage of clean water, severely impacting not just the ability to hydrate, but to wash, clean, and cook. The siege and infrastructure damage from bombing continue to prevent adequate water treatment and distribution and sewage management, with flooding exponentially increasing the risk of the spread of infectious diseases amongst displaced Palestinians. On the 20th of December 2023, the Director General of the World Health Organization warned that Gaza is already experiencing soaring rates of infectious disease outbreaks. Diarrhea cases among children aged under 5 are 25 times what they were before the conflict. Such illnesses can be lethal for malnourished children, more so in the absence of functioning health services. Sewage is flowing into the streets where Palestinians are living, as it can no longer be managed. Everywhere you look is congested with makeshift shelters. Everywhere you go, people are desperate, hungry, and terrified. These conditions, deliberately inflicted by Israel, are calculated to bring about the destruction of the Palestinian group in Gaza.
Since early December 2023, Israeli army attacks on Palestinian hospitals have only increased. The Israeli army has continued to attack and besiege hospitals and healthcare centers, to deprive them of electricity and fuel crucial to maintain effective functioning and equipment, to obstruct them from receiving medical supplies, food and water, to force their evacuations and closure, and effectively to destroy them. The north of Gaza, without any functioning hospital for a week, has only 4 severely challenged, partially functioning hospitals available now. Israel has transformed Palestinian hospitals in Gaza from places of healing into death zones and scenes of bloodbath, death, devastation, and despair. Many hospitals have now become mere places where people are waiting to die.
There have now been more than 238 attacks on healthcare in Gaza, in which over 61 hospitals and other healthcare facilities have been damaged or destroyed. Only 13 out of 36 hospitals and 18 out of 72 healthcare centers are still even functioning, some of them barely, despite the overwhelming number of people injured in Israeli attacks. The Israeli army has targeted hospital generators, hospital solar panels, and other life-saving equipment, such as oxygen tanks and water tanks. It has also targeted ambulances, medical convoys, and first responders. 311 healthcare workers have been killed, on average 4 per day, including at least 22 healthcare workers killed on duty. Those killed include some of Gaza's most experienced and skilled doctors, including Hani al-Hathim, head of the emergency section at Al-Shifa Hospital, killed with his wife, Dr. Samir Jarafi, and their children. Dr. Mohammed Dabur, head of pathology at Al-Shifa Hospital, reportedly killed with his son and father while attempting to flee Gaza City. Dr. Medhat Saidem, plastic reconstructive burn surgeon at Al-Shifa Hospital, and Dr. Himam Alo, nephrologist at Al-Shifa Hospital, were killed in attacks on their family homes. Interviewed shortly before his death, Dr. Alo responded as follows when asked why he was not fleeing the north to the south. "If I go, who would treat my patients? We are not animals. We have the right to receive proper health care. You think I went to medical school and from my postgraduate degrees for a total of 14 years, so I think only about my life and not my patients?" The systematic destruction of Palestinian hospitals and the killing of specialist Palestinian doctors is not only impacting the care of Palestinians in Gaza at present, it is also undermining the prospect of a future Palestinian healthcare system in Gaza, destroying its capacity to rebuild and to care effectively for the Palestinian people in Gaza.
Israel has shown a blatant and total disregard for the protection of Gaza's medical facilities. We are watching as hospitals are turned into morgues and ruins. These supposedly protected facilities are being bombed, are being shot at by tanks and guns, encircled and raided, killing patients and medical staff. The World Health Organization has documented 203 attacks on healthcare that have led to at least 22 fatalities and 59 injuries of health workers on duty. Medical staff, including our own, are utterly exhausted and in despair. They have had to amputate limbs from children suffering from severe burns without anesthesia or sterilized surgical tools. Due to forcible evacuations by Israeli soldiers, some doctors have had to leave patients behind after facing the unimaginable choice between their lives or those of their patients. 4 of our MSF staff have been killed. Many more have lost family members. Numerous other colleagues have been injured. Northern Gaza is being erased from the map. The healthcare system has collapsed.